Thanks for joining us again today on Practical Church Planting. My name is Brian Androsian, and with me is Dylan Dodson. And today we're going to be giving you our 2022 church prediction reflections.
So we do this. This is our last episode of the year. So by the way, this is the last one. We'll take 2 weeks off, and then we'll be back in January. We always reflect on the things that we predicted in January, which is always one of the bigger podcast downloads. And now we reflect on them. So we're going to talk through what we predicted and whether or not they were true. Now, we have no data behind this.
Right.
So, this is pretty much just anecdotal and conversations with other people. So this is not like yes and no. We'll just reflect on how we saw things transpire this year. And, perhaps you'll be able to resonate with some of these. Maybe hopefully it'll encourage you if you were struggling in some of these areas to know that you're not alone. So anyway, we had, I think, 9. Is that what we have?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
8. We had 8 beginning of 22.
Yep.
And I don't remember who said what for some of these. And so we're just going to talk through all of them. So here we go.
Good.
Church prediction reflections as we close 2022. The first one we had was growth in giving will outpace growth in attendance. Now, again, this is all anecdotal, personal experience and conversation, so we don't have big data on it. We have noticed, so for us, we've noticed a kind of, COVID has changed a lot of things. I think I read recently that 2/3 of churches in the United States of America are now under 100 people. And I think like 5 or 7 years ago, I don't know what it was, but it was not that.
Not
it
so
was
much, yeah.
I don't know. So obviously, I think a large part of that is people have left the church completely. I think another big portion of that is people coming less often.
Yeah.
And it's not, some people just are less often. Some people that really do love Jesus because they're traveling more, they work from home. You just, depending on your area, if you got a lot of white collar workers like we do in Raleigh, I think you might see that more than other places. So it's just a lot of things have changed. And so I think some of that is, I think churches in general are smaller than they were pre-COVID for sure. I also think some of them, people just got coming left often, but hopefully are engaging in at least some other ways.
Yeah.
And so for us, what we've noticed is not so much a big increase in a Sunday average attendance this year, but giving has been really, really strong. So I guess that does mean growth will outpace giving. We are currently working on our budget for next year. And one of the things we're trying to figure out is, I don't know, you have your growth predictions, and then you have your financial, giver, per giver per person or whatever. But it's like our giving was, I don't know.
Yeah.
A lot higher. So I think the answer to this is yes, but it's kind of hard to fully explain.
Yeah. You talk to more pastors than I do, but the handful that I've talked to, it seems like we're even to the point where, I'm trying to think back to the last few conversations I've had. It seems like we're even to the point where we're not even talking about comparing where we are to pre-COVID. It seemed like for a while, anytime you talk to a pastor that you haven't talked to in a while, it's like, have you hit your pre-COVID numbers again? And it seems like we're even not past that as in we've hit it, but we don't really care that much about that anymore. We kind of realize that this is a different situation now. And so I've heard from the handful I've talked to that it doesn't seem that most probably aren't at their pre-COVID numbers.
Yep.
Or some obviously started during COVID, so they don't know, but aren't really hitting that crazy growth. But I'm hearing a lot less of financial issues. Now, obviously, that's not across the board. That's just the few that I've talked to. But they seem to be doing okay financially. Whether that means they're better or worse than before, I don't really know. But it seems that is a little less of a worry than maybe it was before, where Sunday attendance maybe not necessarily is a worry, but isn't necessarily what it was before everything happened.
I definitely think for churches some churches closed, some churches are really hard. But the churches that you kind of got through it, because you have less people going on, I think that you have the giving number per person is higher than it was pre-COVID.
That's what it seems. Yeah.
So I think for a lot of people, if they're looking at their pre-COVID attendance, you would assume a certain amount of giving for those people if you're around before COVID, if your church was. And then post-COVID, you're looking at, if we had this many people pre-COVID, it would have looked like this financially. It would have been a lot worse, tougher spot.
Yeah.
And so obviously the people that are there are committed. I think what you might be seeing too, the people that are there committed are really appreciative. So they might be giving more. They might be taking more ownership than they did before because there was less people. And my experience, whether it's church or anything else, when people take more ownership for something, they also give more financially because they're really invested. And so growth in giving will outpace growth in attendance. Yes. I don't know what this looks like for the future. I think it probably just means maybe on average, your per person giving is a little bit higher and trying to work that out. But it does seem that was at least our experience this year, which I know is not the experience for everybody.
Yeah, for sure.
So growth in giving will outpace growth in attendance. I think that happened for a lot of various reasons for various churches this year. Number 2, we had Bible teaching will be more evangelistic than topical series life skills help. Now, sometimes when they put these points down, I don't write them super clear and I say them differently. So that doesn't sound the most clear. Bible
Sure.
teaching will be more evangelistic than topical series Life Skills Help. I guess we were predicting more people would go that way.
Yeah,
I guess. I think that's what that meant.
Yeah.
Again, this is hard to know for sure because you don't know what all churches are doing.
Yeah.
I do think one of the things we talk about why we're proponents of preaching expositionally through books of the Bible, or at least passages predominantly. You don't have to do that for everything. I mean, we're in a Christmas series. We're not doing that right now. Yeah. But I think it's because if people are there, they actually want to know what the Bible says. And so, the Life Skills Help was great. I think it was great too, or was easier too in the past few decades where there was kind of this assumption that church is good. Mm-hmm. And so I want to hear what the church or a pastor has to say. I think people care less what a church or a pastor has to say about, topical series. Now, of course it can happen. And of course there's really large churches that are primarily topical, like, Life Church, Craig Rochelle, that sort of thing. And so it's really easy for people to look at that and see, well, they're doing it, we can do it too. It's just, there's a lot of things about large churches with really gifted communicators and a lot of resources that are not emulatable for smaller churches. Yep. And, preaching ability and that sort of thing. So this one's hard to answer. I do think it's more, we're proponents of that just because I think people are showing up, they want to know what the Bible says. And for us, it's not so much people, I think sometimes people are afraid of preaching through books of the Bible. That's like a really long sermon series. But again, for me, the biggest thing I say, it's not that the length of the sermon series that matters. It matters whether the preacher is engaging. Yeah. So if you're engaging, people are fine with it. If you're boring, you're probably going to be boring. You might be boring either way. I don't know.
Right.
Maybe it's a little bit easier to be boring when you're preaching exegetically through text, because you could just say, well, this verse says this verse says this, and it's like, okay. Yeah. But Bible preaching will be more evangelistic than topical series Life Skills Help. A lot of the churches, pastors that I'm in relationship with preach predominantly through the Bible more than the topical series, so I don't know if there's been a change overall. But I do definitely think post-COVID, there's the advantageous thing of preaching through books of the Bible is because people want to know what the scriptures say. And of course, obviously, even when you're preaching, you're still sharing your opinion and what you think, but hopefully it's at least pretty grounded, and so people can see where you're coming from. So,
yeah, and I was going to say kind of what you said. I think this, there's some very large churches that I don't know if really ever preach through books of the Bible, maybe occasionally, but not predominantly. And so it's easy to see those because those are the ones that, if you follow like any church, they might show up in on your TikTok or Instagram or something like that. And so it may seem like this is just the way churches are going, but that's much different than probably the vast majority of, or really everyone that's listening to this podcast, like involved in this world.
I don't think Craig Rochelle's listening to
probably.
This
well, you never know.
Hey, Craig.
But one thing I found interesting, and I was trying to remember it, and I cannot remember. I think it was this year. It would have been towards the beginning of this year. But so I grew up at a very large mega church, who is, I kind of pop into their podcast now and again. Like I kind of keep up a little bit with what they're doing, but I haven't been there in at least a decade. It's back in Michigan where I'm from, and I don't really keep up with a ton of what they're doing, but I listen every once in a while. And I think it was early this year they did like they preached through a book of the Bible, and it was Revelation. And it was like it was kind of funny because the pastor, he was like he said something along the lines of, he's like, this is gonna be a much longer sermon series than you guys are used to, like on the first week. And he's like, this will be like 12 weeks. And I was like, ugh. I think we were like 50 weeks into Mark at the time. I was like, well, it's a little different, but and he gave some reasons why, but it was kind of along those lines of like people just want to know what the Bible says. And I don't know why they landed on Revelation, and I don't know that I don't think they've like completely switched their model to just do that by any means. But outside of preaching through maybe the book of James or some like really short books, I don't know that I've really ever seen them do that. And so I remember seeing that and thinking like, oh, that must be something different, because this is, I've been following them, or either part of them or following them for 30 years, and I don't remember really ever seeing them dive that much into like a specific book. And so I don't know, maybe some things are changing a little bit, but I think people recognize that people are just really curious what the Bible says and want to know that more than just what a pastor thinks, which that's not really what topical series are, but sometimes you can get that kind of, that can get a little murky sometimes.
As a side note, it makes me think, so there's a guy who I really respect. I'm not going to say his name here because I disagree with what he says, this part, but he listens to there's a podcast I listen to pretty regularly, really helped by him, but he was definitely more of the preach through topical series when he was preaching regularly at the church that he was leading at the time. And one of the things he talks about is like not how many really good sermons do you have in you a year. Okay. And part of it is like, well, he led a larger church and he talks to a lot of larger pastors or business leaders. And so like, it's a little bit different, because I'm like, well, if you're a smaller church, it's not like you can only preach 25 times a year, because like that's your job. Yeah. But anyway, I think part of that was because it's a good point. Like how many great sermons do you have a year? Now we could talk about like what's the point of that question, and why maybe preaching the best sermons isn't the only thing that matters. And I'm
Sure.
not saying that's what he
Yeah.
said, but I say that just because when the model is topical through topics, it is more on you, the preacher, to figure out what to say and
Mhm.
make it well, or make it engaging, whatever. When you're preaching through books of the Bible, it is a little easier. I think it's easier to be boring. It is. So you got to make sure you're not, you're doing it in an engaging manner. But it does take some of the pressure off of trying to figure out these home run sermons every week, which you
Mhm.
cannot do.
Yeah.
And so when you're preaching through books of the Bible, it does take some of the pressure off trying to figure out, oh, what am I going to say this week that's going to be really great? And obviously it's from a biblical framework.
Mhm.
So we're not saying, it's bad. It's just that could take some of the pressure off if you preach through books of the Bible, trying to figure out some home run sermon every week.
Yeah, for sure. And we've this was more the case early on at New City, not a whole lot anymore. But there was a time, and I don't mean like a large portion, but there's a small handful of people that were at New City at the beginning that were from kind of a different larger church in the area, just because of relationships and people had shifted and things like that. And there was I remember hearing a bunch and people like that I was close with would say the same thing of like they were used to these kind of topical sermons and series and things like that, and then coming to a church that almost only preached through books of the Bible, at least for periods of time. How kind of like interesting and refreshing that was, and it wasn't that like, oh, I've never opened the book of whatever Jonah. I'm looking at your books of the Bible, the ones that we've done.
Judges.
I've never opened. Well, maybe Judges, but like
Yeah.
I've never. It's not like I've never read these before, but if you're in if you're in like one church for a long period of time that does mostly topical series, you're going to hear over time, you're going to hear some of the same series kind of recycled, which is fine. Like not everyone is hearing that every time if you're there for a long period of time. But I remember hearing that feedback a good amount of, oh, it's nice to be in a church that preaches through books of the Bible, because it's just something that hadn't really experienced before. So that was just our anecdotal experience, but I do think more and more people are interested in that.
Yeah. So answer for our first prediction, I guess I would say yes. Second one is maybe. We don't know.
That's true. I guess
But
the
we would
prediction
do.
is more will do it. I don't know if more are doing it,
Yeah.
but it seems like more people are interested.
Number 3, online church focus will swing back to in-person gatherings. So again, we don't have the data on there. We can only share from our experience.
Mhm.
Our experience has been we do the live stream thing, and people watch it. From my guess is that some people it is because it's available. Some people do on occasion stay home and watch. Like I do think if we did not have any live stream, we would have a little bit higher attendance
Mhm.
from our own people.
Mhm. Right.
I think if we did not have live stream, we would have less new people coming through our doors.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
maybe it evened out somewhat. Maybe people would be probably a little bit more consistent, I think, if we didn't have the live stream than if we do. But I just, obviously during COVID, it was all online, all this stuff. I think we realized is that people want relationships and they want community. Particularly if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably not leading a mega church. And so community is going to be a very big draw for your church. And so we have seen that people really want to do that.
Mhm.
And most people that want to stay home and watch a live stream consistently, they probably wouldn't have engaged much with your church even before COVID.
Yeah.
Perhaps if they're really someone that's just like, I just want to do because it's easier and I can't, or if I want to watch a church in another state, like they're going to watch that church in another state regardless of what you're doing. And so,
Yeah.
Online church. So I think, yeah, we will continue to do the live stream thing and
Mhm.
want it to do well because it is a pretty big open door. I mean, literally just yesterday we talked to a woman who came to Raleigh to visit. She said about 6 or 7 weeks ago.
Mhm.
She didn't come to New City. I think she was just like looking around the area because she was going to move. She has a remote job, so she could move from where she was in Florida.
Yeah.
Decided to move here. Said she was listened to the last 6 weeks of watched the live stream the last 6 weeks. She even said we did a series before, Advent series called "Let's Talk About It," or a couple of years ago, and we
Mhm.
talk about like porn, church into politics, politics in the church.
Yeah.
Shame, regret. Some tough stuff.
Mhm.
And so she listened to I think she said the first one she watched after she came back was the church and politics. She thought it was
Mm.
really refreshing, and she shared it with her hairstylist. I forget who she signed to, who's never been to church, and like she was
Oh, wow.
started listening to the sermons, and I was like, oh, that's kind of cool.
Cool.
But I started
Nice.
to say like she came, she found. I'm still kind of confused how she came across New City, but she found it
Yeah.
and she watched it, and now she's here and she's like filled out the Connect card and she's like wants to join a group, like she's in,
Hmm.
which wouldn't have happened if we didn't have a live stream, just because she obviously in the day and age we live today, it's a lot of churches have it, and so if you don't have it, it could be a disadvantage to you. Although it's a whole other thing. I think if you can't do it well, then I would not do it,
Yeah.
because it can be bad. But anyway, so it's helped in that way. And so I think a lot of churches are still doing the live stream thing, but trying to find ways to engage people in person is still the priority for sure.
Yeah, I think to take it a little bit of a different direction of do I think churches should or shouldn't? I think that I get, well, like I said, I mean, I'm gonna say this every time. I have no idea what the data is, but just from conversations I've heard and seen, it seems like there's a less of a focus on it now than there was. It doesn't mean like people are abandoning it necessarily, but it seems like people are a lot like kind of like maybe like recalibrating halfway to like for a time it was like everything has to be really great online. And it was for us too, and I'm glad we did all that. Like for us, we spent a while of like things need to be really good on live stream, not just online.
Yeah.
But now I've gotten to the point where we're happy with it. It's not perfect. It's not that we're never going to try and improve it, but we're not going to just like endlessly shovel money into it because it does at some point you have budgets and it does it's not always the best return on investment. But I think I've seen more and more of that of like we spent a lot of focus on it. Now we're going to kind of pivot back a little bit, not necessarily abandon it, but focus more on in person and still do the online stuff. Obviously, like I still just talking about live stream, not just online, but still do like live stream stuff and things like that. But we really want people in person.
Yep.
And I was listening to a podcast the other day, and it was really fascinating. And he even said that it was a conversation. It was one of the guys is a pastor, and he even said like I'm not even I wouldn't even recommend this to anybody, but this is just what they did. He said that they've basically completely abandoned all all live stream, all uploading their podcasts, all like everything digital. Probably not literally everything digital, but that's kind of what he was implying.
Yeah.
He's always said they're a small church. Small is relative. I have no idea how small. Like I don't know anything about the church, but he was just like we focused on it for so long that it seemed like we just wanted to really focus on in person. And so we've just he's like, we don't upload anything anymore. And it's and from his perspective, he said it's been great. Like obviously I've never been to the church. It's a different part of the country. But I've heard more and more, like maybe not that extreme, but more and more sentiments like that of like, man, I don't know if it's getting burnt out of online. I don't know if that has something to do with it or just like really wanting people in person. But for whatever reason, it does seem like the focus is shifting a little less towards online. But like you said, I don't think that means just abandon it, and it doesn't matter anymore. But it does seem to be a little less of a focus than maybe it was at the beginning of the year.
I think at the end of the day, you got to do what you're convicted of. Whether you're going to do everything online, something's online, nothing's online. There is not a right or wrong answer. We have different experiences. We're reaching different people.
Yeah, for sure.
I did notice there's another large church I was looking up the other day because I heard this pastor on a podcast and I really like his podcast, and so I was like, I'm curious like how they run their services. And it's a larger church, and they don't. From what I could tell, I don't know if they do a live stream or not, but they don't even upload the sermons. They only upload the audio and podcast. They don't upload the video.
No video.
Now I know they do record it because they on their YouTube channel they upload like 2 or 3, like 3 or 4. They upload like I don't know between like 1 or 3 small snippets of the sermon on YouTube a week, but they don't upload the whole thing.
Yeah,
and it's part of those things where like they're trying to engage community. Real community like in person. And so I think I would say that, and I'll also say too, like if you're a church planner and you're interested in, or even a small church doing your budget for next year, or you're raising funds, I would generally speaking recommend a live stream, but I would also put in your budget and say, hey, we're going to spend $3,000,
right?
Because you need to get at least one, depending on how you're like our setup is 2 because of how it's set up. So we need 2 cameras. You need a computer to run it. That's different than your your slides and all that sort of thing, and just know it's going to cost you another serve position every single week. So that has to be trained. You can't just like throw someone in there.
Right.
So I would like plan on it, but like I wouldn't just like, oh, this person has a camera. So like if you want to do it, you're going to have to put some money into it so that it doesn't look terrible. It doesn't have to look amazing, but it can't look terrible.
Yep.
So,
yep.
Yeah, I do think online church focus will swing back to in-person gatherings for a lot of churches. Not all, but I think that's happened. Number 4, churches that prioritize an online presence will grow in person much more than those that do not. So this is kind of a funny little inverse.
Yeah.
I also do, just from experience, I know there's exceptions, I do think this is true. This is, again, I think there are some unique strategies or I forget the opportunities for churches like the one you mentioned that's only doing nothing online. I do think that there are getting some people that they would not have gotten if they had done online. I do think so.
Yeah.
Would they have gotten more people that they're getting online?
Right.
I would say probably not, but I also say like that's not a bad thing either.
Right. Yeah.
Like you got to do, even with all this practical church planning, man, we try to give you practical things that you can implement, but like we're very clear, you got to follow your convictions. These are just like things you can try what you want, don't try what you don't. This is not you must do this a certain way.
Yeah.
But I do, again, I can only speak from our experience. live stream has certainly been a front door for people because I've heard multiple people this year mention the live stream. Now, sometimes I'm like, is it actual live stream, or are you just like mentioning like you watch the sermon later and you say live
Yeah.
stream? But I think there's sometimes that's the case, but there is live stream because people have said I watched it on Sunday. Or the lady I talked to last week, she said I've watched the live stream the last 6 Sundays, and then she moved this week.
Right.
So she clearly is watching the live stream on Sunday morning.
Yeah.
We know that because of YouTube, when we do the live stream, it like takes it down and then doesn't like put it back up after the live stream till like later in the day. Or
Yeah,
something. I don't know
yeah.
why that happens. So I do think that's all to say. Like, it can be a good front door. Don't expect all these people to watch your live stream. Especially if you're new and you're smaller, it's not going to be as great as the other churches. So it's not so much like an advertising marketing tool, but it is a way for people to see what's going on and to get familiar, especially in a day and age when if someone's never been to church before, it's really uncomfortable to go.
Yeah.
Like if somebody invited me to, a Buddhist service or an Islamic service or whatever on a Friday, like I wouldn't go.
Right.
Now, I wouldn't go because I follow Jesus, but even if I wasn't, I was like, that's just uncomfortable to me. I don't know anything about it. If there was just to put you in the mindset, if there was a live stream option and I was curious about such things, and I was just like someone who, had a coworker and they was invited me, I would watch the live stream
Right.
to see like, what am I going to expect? What are they going to ask me to do? Is it going to be awkward?
Yeah.
Oh, like, okay, they're singing. I don't know the songs, but they're not like making me do anything. Okay, maybe I'll check it out. And so I do think that's true. Churches that prioritize an online presence. Now, when we say online presence too, we've got a lot of episodes about this. We're not just talking about live stream.
Yeah.
So you don't even have to live stream. We talk about, we have episodes on, I don't have them in front of me, but on YouTube, on social media. If you go to practicalplanting.com, you can get our Church Planners Guide to Social Media for free. Just put in your email address on the homepage and we'll send it to you. Those that do that certainly will do better than those that don't. Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's what I was gonna say. Like this can be separate from the live stream issue too. Because if you're watching this and you're like, we can't swing $3,000, so why should we even do it? It's like there's not like a do live stream or else you're just not online at all. There's so many things that I have no idea if this is true, but we do so many different online things that aren't the live stream.
Yep.
And I don't know. I can't say which ones are like the most effective at reaching people. I have no idea. But like, it's not like it's live stream or nothing. If for some reason we couldn't live stream anymore, or our equipment died, or for whatever reason we had to stop, our online presence would look very similar. We just wouldn't have the live stream. And so it's still super important, and it's still something you can do on on almost a $0 budget, honestly, like with a decent phone. And there's a whole wide array of things you can do, and we have a million episodes on it. And if you just Google it, you'll get a bunch of ideas. And it's not like you have to do these specific things or these specific things, but being present online and being like actually active to where people can see that if they're looking for you, they can just see that, hey, you're doing things, you're still meeting, you're not close your doors, or you're not like something weird's not going on.
Yep.
Just that little bit it kind of just removes that one little roadblock of people saying, oh, things are going on like normal. I may not get as much of a sense of what the church is like as I would through a live stream, but at least I can get an idea of what some people look like, maybe what the inside of the building looks like, maybe what the teaching is a little bit like, if there's like some message clips or something like that in there. And you can get a semi-decent idea of what the church is like before you attend, which is what first-time people really need.
Yeah. So prioritize an online presence will grow much more in person. Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's just weird too. If you check out a church's Facebook page, the only thing they have is their live stream on Sunday. Like it's just, and the thing about the social media, it is a long, consistent, slow thing. And it's not massive growth. People try it and they realize I don't get 30,000 likes on a picture or even 30 likes on a picture. So I'm going to stop doing it. Again, I would highly recommend, if you haven't, practicalplanting.com, get the Church Planners Guide to Social Media. We've got episodes as well. You can look through the archives, like really practically, here's the things you could post.
Yeah.
Because you just want to be consistent. And so churches that do that are definitely going to do better than those that don't.
Yeah, for sure.
Number 5, large numbers of pastors will continue to resign. Again, so we don't have numbers, data, but everything you read says that that's happening.
Right. Right.
And I was thinking about this last night, actually. I know, not that I know all these guys like super personally, but 3 guys that I know of, or at least have met in some personal capacity, I have found out in the last 2 months, all of them are transitioning away next year. And what I've noticed is I think it's a little bit different. I think in the past it's kind of like I'm quitting ministry. What I've noticed is all 3 of them are still doing ministry church work or helping pastors. They're just not going to be the lead pastor of their church anymore.
Right.
So it's like I get it. I mean, I've only been doing this for 6 years, but I get, like, I was talking to a friend of mine who his lead pastor is going to be transitioning out. We were talking about this, I don't know how long ago it was. And he was a little like, obviously he didn't understand. He was kind of taken aback by it and kind of thrown off and kind of disappointed. And I was like, I get his disappointment. He didn't, see it coming. But I also was like, man, I also understand why he's doing this. It's just, it can be hard.
Yeah.
And if you've led for a while, it can be difficult. But it's been interesting to me. I think taking the pressure of the week to week, having to preach, having to counsel, which is, there's nothing wrong with, it can be heavy. And to focus, like some of them are doing just pastoral care stuff. Some of them, one of the guys is going to be focusing more on writing books and articles. The other one is going to be going to 10 to 15 hours a week at their church, and then working for another church organizational thing full time, but still, helping out and stuff like that. And I don't know. I guess part of it's COVID. Some of it's just life can be hard. I think some of it is just, I don't think it's a bad thing, but we live in a culture where people change jobs more than they used to.
Yeah.
So that's not right or wrong. It's just our culture. So before, not just ministry, any job, you'd work it your whole life, or whatever. And so now there are more opportunities to try different things that, in different seasons. And so I don't knock any pastor for doing that. It is interesting to me what's going to happen to all these churches and that sort of thing. Obviously, if they're larger and the church pastor is transitioning, one's actually just closing the church altogether.
Oh, wow.
And so anyway, I think that's happened. But it's been interesting. It's not just been I'm quitting. I've noticed it's been, but I still want to do this, but just the weekly day-to-day things of ministry are kind of tiring, and so I need a break.
Yeah, I've seen some more of like, I don't know if this is the right word, but like higher profile or more known, a handful of more known pastors that this seems to be happening with. Now, I don't know if they all, like, I became aware of it recently. Now, I don't know if they actually fell into 2022 or not. But like we're both relative proponents of the Carey Nieuwhof podcast. And recently, it was a handful of months ago.
I'm not relative. I'm a proponent.
Well, yeah.
I like
Well, yeah, I do too. Yeah. I don't know why I said that. But like a handful of months ago, he had, goodness, is it Jeff Henderson? Is that his name? The guy who wrote "What Are You For"?
Yeah.
That book. Yeah. So he was on there talking about his transition off. I don't know if that was this year. I don't remember the dates, but him and obviously Carey Nieuwhof had transitioned away from pastoral leadership, however long ago to focus on his thing, or full time. I guess he's still. I don't know if he's still part time, but like just this past couple weeks, the guy who's taking over for John Mark Comer was on the podcast, and so that seems to be.
But it's the same thing. John Mark Comer, big fan of his.
I actually don't know why he's leaving. So maybe
you can't really see it. Ruthless Elimination of Hurry is one of my all-time favorite books.
Mm-hmm.
He's doing this more like, I'm going to completely butcher, so I'm not going to try to explain it. But he's trying to help pastors and churches.
Okay, gotcha.
But he's not going to be the lead pastor at a church anymore.
Right. There seems to be more stories, and I'm sure there's a bunch of others I don't know about, but more stories that I'm seeing of pastors leaving that aren't for like moral failure reasons, but that are like of their own choice to do something that's not walking away from the faith or church.
But many times it's still ministry related. It's just not leading the church.
Yeah. So yeah, seems to be interesting. That's hopefully that. I mean, it's like hopefully what they're doing is going to be good and helpful, which I'm sure it will be. So it's like obviously we don't want this trend to continue, but if it does, hopefully it goes in the direction these guys.
Yeah, I just think it's really interesting. If COVID wouldn't have happened, would all of them transition? Probably not.
Yeah.
But I also wonder how much of it. I do wonder how much of it is we have the ability today to transition jobs and things.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone does.
Yeah.
And so you're not necessarily stuck. Not necessarily that they hated it, but they feel like they've got wisdom and experience. They want to apply it in a different area.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll see if how that happens in the future. But it definitely seems like, and of course the data, people talk about pastors quitting too.
Right.
Some churches have closed their doors, and so I think that has happened.
Yep.
Okay, that was what, 5?
Yep.
6.
5.
Number 6. Simplified churches will engage people better than complex ones. I think this is always true, but I think this is definitely true now. So, just think, for example, of the church that's been around for a long time. They've got 13 ministries and 7 meeting organizations, and they're all just like, that's just a lot of stuff knows going on.
Yeah.
And a simple church. I forget, is it Tom Rainer that wrote it? Probably not.
Yes.
It is.
No, I think it is.
Okay.
I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah. He talks about doing like a very select few things, but doing them well. Kind of makes me think of, I was thinking about this also this weekend, like Southwest model, airline where they all have the same airplane. They don't do seating arrangements. They don't do food, whatever. Side note, in terms of why the simplified model can be helpful, especially in times of crisis, I was in Orlando in November doing a church planting assessment with Acts 29, helping out there. And the hurricane randomly hit. And so all of us, our flights were getting canceled and moved because they closed the airport on Thursday. Yeah. And those of us that had Southwest flights, there was like, I don't know, 3 or 4 of us. No one had any cancellations or movement. Everyone else had other ones, all these different airlines. And I don't know. I do think part of it was because Southwest, they only fly one type of plane and everything's the same. It is so interchangeable that when that hit, I was like, oh, we can get planes here. We can get, because if another plane's here from another airline, but it wasn't as big as the one that was supposed to be there, then at least some of the people get their flights canceled because they can't all fit. Like there's just all this complex stuff.
Right, yeah.
And so anyway, What I think that has to do with ministry is I think with COVID, many churches have lost people, and if you're still trying to do all the things you were trying to do before with less people, it's going to be harder. And so focusing on just a few things, and your people can do stuff they want if they want to do them, but not necessarily making them like church-wide sponsor. We're going to announce to everybody every time you do it.
Yeah.
I think if you can focus on less things, the better. And this can be hard because again, in an online social media world where we see large churches doing a lot of stuff, we feel like we have to do all that stuff.
Right.
But part of the reason they do more of those things is because they can. They just have the resources, they have the people, they have
Yeah.
the building space, they have more staff.
Mhm.
And so I think if you can focus on less things and do them well, I think that'll be a lot easier for people to take next steps, for people to connect. And so I don't have data for this, but especially out of COVID, with churches being smaller than they were before, doing less things well, I think is better.
Yeah, I just got together with a pastor buddy of ours this past week, and we were talking about this. He brought this up pretty specifically, and just talked about how he's like, I'm just trying to do things as simple as possible. And we didn't really talk about like, is it translating to church growth? That wasn't really the conversation, but I could tell just from his like personal perspective, it seemed to be far less stressful than maybe what the alternative would have been. And he just seemed to be much more at peace with it. And he's like, I just want to like, and he wasn't saying this as like I'm not going to do anything else or anything like that. But it was just like, I'm just trying to pastor people, trying to preach faithfully, trying to, follow Jesus personally. And he's like, and we're doing other stuff obviously, but I'm trying to focus on the simple things and not make things super complicated. And it was like, yeah, obviously there's always going to be other things that we want to do, and we can so easily like overcomplicate everything if we are not careful. But at the end of the day, things don't have to be super complicated, especially as we're talking about the church size that most of us are, especially as we're not talking about being a giant church or anything like that. If we're just talking about faithfully pastoring and leading the people that we have, it doesn't need to be overly complicated. And when you try to overly complicate it, then things get a little murky, or at least personally become pretty stressful.
Yep. So simplified churches will engage people better than complex ones. I think especially out of COVID, that's definitely true.
Yep.
Number 7, people will care more about community than what church has the best options for them. Definitely think this is true. Again, particularly if you're listening to this podcast, because you're probably not 1,000 plus, which means one of the draws of your church, one of the strengths, is the ease at which people can potentially get connected to community. Now, I will say, it's not that I think one big exception to this. I mean, some people have their preferences. That's fine. I don't even knock that. I get it. If I was looking for a church, I have certain preferences that aren't necessarily like first core issues that would make a big difference to me. Like I saw recently a post, a guy. Anyway, he posted like reasons not to leave a church. If the sermon is boring, if this is not good, and some of them I was like, I get it, but I was like, but I don't think that's I think that's a bad list. Like his point was like, you shouldn't be like hopping around.
Yeah.
And I totally get it. But if I was a part of a church and let's say they got a new pastor or whatever, and the sermons became to be really boring and dull, I would probably leave.
Right.
Because it's boring to me. B, I can't invite people.
Right.
Like I'm not going to leave. I'm not going to leave right away or whatever, but I'm like, some of these things, they're legitimate.
Yeah.
Maybe it makes me not a good Christian. I don't know. One exception with options is definitely when it has to do with people's children, though. So if your church doesn't have certain kids ministry at all, for example, and you've got someone with 3 elementary age kids, or 3 kids under 4, like that, and they have to bring them in the service. Like, and now maybe your conviction is to have kids in service, so I'm not.
Right.
That's fine.
Story, right.
There are challenges to everything that we do. But let's say someone that doesn't want to have their kids in their service, that could be a detriment. If you don't have something for students, middle school, high schoolers, and someone has middle school and high schoolers, we've seen that at New City. People, they want to get engaged, they've come, but we don't have anything formalized right now for that age group, and so they don't stick around. And I get it.
Yeah.
And so I think other than kids, majority of the time people do care more about community, which is why, when I talk to planters, I'm like, you should be as good as you can at preaching. You should try to get better, that sort of thing. But like your ability to preach is not why people are coming in the beginning. It's how well they can connect in the community. Now, if you're really bad and you're boring, then that will be a big detriment.
Right.
But they absolutely will care more about the community, and if there's structures to get connected, than the best preferences and options, and who has the best live stream or who has the best lights or even the music. Again, it can't be bad, but the community is a big draw for a lot of people.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like I think we can look at or use this term preferences sometimes and maybe misconstrue what it means. Like there are certain like preferences, like you're saying, like wanting church to look a certain way or things to sound a certain way or whatever. And then there's other things like you're talking about with kids. Like I don't know, if someone came as like, we because of this age group, I want my kids to be engaged. I wouldn't look at them and be like, well, that's just your preference. Like, yeah, I get it. Like, but yeah, I think people care far more about the people that they're gonna meet, the people that they're gonna be with, people they're gonna like be in community groups with and spend their time with, much more than like does the church look the way or feel the way that
Yeah.
I am used to or want to on a Sunday morning. But the challenge is they have to get to that point. I feel like
Mhm.
it's like the first Sunday they don't have community yet. Hopefully we're good enough at doing hospitality and things like that they feel welcome. But those things may matter more like on the initial first couple visits before they actually get to build that community. So we can't like I don't know like use that as like a well, we can just do, we have a good core community here, so we can just do whatever we want, we can, things can look however we want, or they don't have to sound good because people should care about community. We're like, I agree, but they have to stick around long enough to form that community, which
Yeah.
hopefully won't take more than a couple weeks or or less, like to actually meet people and get at least somewhat of a little bit of a bond there. But they have to be around long enough to do it. So it's like some of this stuff may matter some, but not nearly as much as that.
Right.
The community that people can actually build at your church.
Yeah, so people will care. I think this is definitely true. Much more about community than what the church has the best option. And
For
so you
sure.
should be. What this means, though, is that just because if you're a smaller church, it doesn't mean that it will just happen. You need to be thinking through of like how do we get connect cards from people. We've got episodes on that. We put them in all the seat backs, make it super simple. We mention it every week. We could do better, sure, but like at least it's mentioned. We've got a follow up process that gets. What's your follow up process look like? Is it actually happening with every single person? If they sign up for a group, what happens? Do they just like get one email and hope it works for you, or like what
Right.
is the like how do you actually engage with people? How are you mentioning? How are you encouraging people to take their next step to get connected? You got to think through those things. Just because you're small, community is easier to happen, but you got to try to facilitate it.
Yeah.
And so, but I think that's definitely true. And just try to encourage you. The best thing you can do is offer a in-person community because that's what people are looking for, especially after COVID and not having people. Just generally speaking, we're doing a sermon series on relationships in January, and not just like romantic, because we're going to talk about friendship one week, we're going to talk about singleness one week. So I've been looking at all this data and like how lonely people are, people don't have friends, and all that sort of thing. And so you can provide that. And so the encouragement is to obviously you want to be as good as you can at preaching. And like Brian was saying, if they're new, they're not in the community yet, so everything is bad and awkward. They're not coming back.
Right.
But how do you can get people into community will be really important.
And that's a really good point because we often hear everything's relative. We're not a huge church, we're not tiny, but I often hear from people that come from larger churches is that they like the smaller church because you can build community or because of the community there and things like that. And I always think in my mind like that's easier at a smaller church, but that's not a given at a smaller church. Like you still have to be intentional and like have to talk to people about what that means, especially as you're starting. I remember back when we lived in Michigan many years ago, before going into ministry or anything like that, we were looking for a church and visited a smaller church. And I don't remember the size. Maybe it was a little bit bigger than ours, but it was an older church, And we went, and it was us and a family member of ours, and we went and spent, went at not late, in other words, went like before service, sat through service, and hung out for a little bit and left. And we weren't talked to by a single person. And it wasn't like we left and we're like, oh, I'm so mad at them. But it was like, wow, that just like, I don't know. It just felt weird to like go. And it seemed like a community that has probably mostly been the same people for a long time. And like just to not even like have an option of like where new people could go or anything like that, and not have a single person say anything unless we were the one to reach out to them. It was a smaller church and it would have been much easier, but we definitely left that and we're like, I don't think we're gonna go back. Like we didn't feel welcome, and it's not like they need to bend over backwards for us, but it would have been nice to shake someone's hand. But and so it's not just a given that you're a small church and so community's just gonna build like crazy. You have it's easier to do, but you still have to actually be purposeful and make it happen.
Yeah, and I would say too, you'll hear people say they want community, but doesn't mean that they're going to get community. Like just because somebody says that they want community and your church is small, it doesn't mean they're going to come back. And so what that means is they want community. And some people say that, but they don't actually want to put in the effort.
Sure.
Some people say that, but you have not put in the effort to make it easy for them to get connected into your community. So don't just assume if someone comes to your church and you're smaller and they say I want community, that they're therefore coming back. If you don't make it easy for them to get connected, then they won't.
Yep.
So people will care much more about community than what the church has than what church has best options for them. I think it's definitely true. And then number 8, last but not least, the ability to grow is greater than the ability to shrink. So again, COVID, smaller churches, 2/3 of the church in America are now less than 100 people. I don't remember what it was pre-COVID, but it was not that high.
Right.
So you hear a lot of this stuff, online, people are staying home. I still think at the end of the day, there's a lot of people that are spiritually curious, and there's just a lot of Christians.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people for us to connect with and to grow and to do things with. And so the ability to grow, I still think, even though it might be harder, it might look different, you might have to be creative in some ways, is still greater than the ability to shrink. I guess the ability to shrink is not grammatically the best way to put it, but it flows better.
Shrinkability.
And so, yeah, shrinkability. There you go. And so, yeah, things like online engaging with people, trying to do stuff that way, having a follow-up process. If you're the pastor, you being intentional about meeting with people and not just waiting for them to reach out to you.
Yep.
My typical rule of thumb, because we're small enough that I can tell that if somebody comes twice, and I think if they fill out a Connect card and they've come at least twice, typically I can figure that out.
Yeah.
If they're a guy, I will meet with them. If they're a couple, we may or may not have them over. We don't do that quite as much, Christine and I, because it got to be a lot. But we have like another woman who's not on staff, but like I'd give her the names, and she starts reaching out to these women if they're single too, so that they get met with.
Yep.
So just being really proactive about that. I just think there's a lot of opportunity, even as we're going forward, even as people are attending church less. The opportunity is still very large to connect with people. So
Yeah, for sure. I don't know. Like, I don't know the future. I don't know that this will ever change. I mean, I guess hopefully if it ever changes, it's because there's too many believers. I don't know. Like, I mean,
Right.
I assume this will always be the case, but it's definitely, you hear so much negative news when it comes to churches and leading churches, and people are leaving churches and things like that. I think it's just an important thing to remember that, maybe overall church numbers, maybe it is decline. I don't know, maybe, but at the end of the day, I don't think people are just walking away from the faith in droves. I think people are still curious. They may not have fully, given their lives over to Christ, but I think people are still really curious about what this whole Christianity means, what the Bible means, and what it means to actually have this like real community. And so, yeah, I think the ability to grow is definitely still there and always will be. But I think it's important to be reminded of that, because if you're not careful, and like this month, this is unrelated to anything like this, but got rid of all social media off my phone just to try and, I don't know, whatever, take a break. I don't know. But one of those was Twitter, and it has been, Twitter is by far my favorite social media platform. I don't really post that. I've never tweeted anything.
he's a
in my life.
stalker.
I just listen. I have people I follow, and like I find that to be much more interesting than like any of the others. But not having it has been like the biggest breath of relief that I wasn't expecting. And I didn't do it for any reason. I just want to spend less time on my phone. But there's so much, like, even though most of the people I follow are believers and are, whether church leaders or kind of like church involved, there's still just people, so much negative church news is shared and church negative trends and things like that, that just removing it has been like just not focusing on the negative. And it's not like you can just put your head in the sand and ignore things that are happening, but still focusing on that. Hey, there are still a lot of people that really are curious about the church, or really curious about Christ, has been, it's just a good reminder to remind yourself now and again.
Yes, the ability to grow is greater than the ability to shrink. Definitely that's true. And if you're like, well, how can we grow? We've got over 300 episodes. And sometimes I think of just regurgitating the first 100, because how many people are going back and listening to them?
Yep.
Or I'll think about a topic, like, oh, we did this in episode whatever. So I know it's kind of annoying to search, but pretty much everything, I've got a Google Sheet. Maybe I should post that in the Radical Church Planting Facebook group for reference, or something, where you can just Command F or whatever, and just hit a keyword and see what number that is. Probably should put that in there. There's tons of stuff and super practical. So maybe that could help you going through the archives.
Yeah, for sure.
Also, this is the last one of the year. So again, thanks for joining us this year. This is the largest in terms of downloads we've ever had, and so hopefully that's been helpful for you.
Yeah, definitely.
If you want some resources, again, Facebook, the Practical Church Planting Facebook group, join it. We do moderate what gets approved. So if you post like, hey, listen to my sermon or my resource, that will not get approved. But if you have a question, or if somebody asks a question in the comments, your resource is helpful, you can post it there. It's just, if we said yes, it would turn into a spam group, which there are other ones like that, not this one. So if you're on Facebook, join the Practical Church Planting Facebook group. You can also check out practicalplanting.com. We've got free resources there. We got some even series graphics and bumper videos you can use for free. And you can get a church planter social media guide and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. So you can connect with us.
That's right.
Hope you guys have a great Christmas, Happy New Year, and we'll be back in 2023.